who have for those who have said that they couldn't make it this evening but would like to be kept up to date with everything um, that we have to say and everything that they would like to learn at this webinar. So you're very, very welcome, everybody from all over, to Christ among the ruins, finding light in Gaza's darkness. And just as we begin Advent, this is a perfect time to hold this event. I can tell you that we've people from Ireland, England, Wales, Scotland, Israel, Canada, United States, Italy, Albania, Uruguay, I see, and further afield. And I can see there were others there telling us where they're coming from. So wherever you are, you're more than welcome this evening. And thank you indeed for taking the time to join with us. We're going to stick very much to time. Um, so with that, I'm going to invite Anne Peacey, who is the chair of the National Justice and Peace Network, because this webinar is being jointly hosted by the National Justice and Peace Network and Pax Christi, England and Wales. So Anne, I'll hand over to you this evening. So I've muted everybody. So if somebody is going to speak, if any of your speakers are going to speak, you will have to unmute and then away you go. So Anne, you have the floor.
Well, thank you. Well, I'm absolutely overwhelmed by the number of people and the wide range of places and interests that people have come from. And so it's a wonderful, wonderful gathering for what is a very important, a crucial event in our justice and peace lives and our attempt to live out Catholic social teaching wherever we are. This is the final event for this year, and the number registering this evening shows the great depth of concern and anger at what we read and what we see and what we hear. Every day we believe that the situation cannot get any worse, and then it does. But there is a sense of hope that so many people from around the world have felt drawn to our gathering this evening. So again, 100,000 welcomes. We're so grateful for all your concern and your passion and your interest. And I'm sure we're going to have a very stimulating and very challenging evening. And we all need to be challenged to actually rise up and try and do whatever we can, so that once again we'll be able to sing the wonderful hymn, O Little Town of Bethlehem, how still we see thee lie. That would be a wonderful thing for us to be able to do one day in the future. So welcome again this evening. And it's great that you've put the places where you're gathering from in our chat. It gives a real sense of the breadth and depth of feeling. So thank you very much again, and thank you very much in advance to Brian O'Toole and Anne and all the other facilitators. So I'm sure we're going to have a wonderful evening. I'm going to hand back to Brian, who is a crucial member of the NJPN executive body, and he is going to hold the rest of the evening together. So over to you, Brian, and welcome again to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you indeed, Anne. Thanks indeed. And I'm going to hand over now to Aisling Griffin. And Aisling is the Schools and Youth Education Worker with Pax Christi, England and Wales. So Aisling, you have the floor.
Great, thank you very much. And just to reiterate Anne's welcome to everybody here this evening. It's, I think, a really important call, but also I think it's going to be kind of full of richness and kind of learning for all of us. So it's really wonderful for us to be working with the National Justice and Peace Network and all their wonderful work in connecting so many people working for peace and justice across the country. And also a big thank you to Anne Farr, who kind of put a lot of work into this on behalf of Pax Christi, England and Wales. So just very briefly as to who we are, I think that's what I've been told to quickly say. So Pax Christi is an international Catholic movement for peace, working for peace, reconciliation and non-violence. And in England and Wales, we do a variety of work, including campaigning on issues such as nuclear weapons, the arms trade, and working for a just peace in Palestine and Israel. So that's why events like this are very important to us in the work that we do. And part of that work is also including standing in solidarity with our partners in Palestine and Israel and across the world. As Brian mentioned, my work is with schools and youth, so we also work with young people across England and Wales looking at peace education. We promote the values of non-violence and the gospel values of non-violence in hoping to try and deepen a theology of that, and also opportunities for prayer and reflection on peace. A big part of that work that's coming up that you might be interested in is that each year we promote the Pope's message for the World Day of Peace. And in 2026, it's going to be looking at unarmed and disarming peace. And so we promote this across England and Wales on the 18th of January next year. But as you can imagine, it is a message that will spread across the year. And so if you'd like resources on our website, we have homily notes, liturgy resources, posters, all kinds of things you can think of to help mark that day. But we just really love to work with you all in promoting those messages of peace that are so important. And hopefully we can learn from this evening as well, kind of different ways that we can work for peace in the Holy Land. So thank you very much for being here. And I just look forward to sharing this evening with you all. So Brian, back to you.
Thank you indeed, Aisling, for that. And as I said earlier, this is a joint webinar being held by the National Justice and Peace Network and Pax Christi England and Wales. And to reflect what Anne was saying a little bit earlier, we had a number of events this year. During this year of hope, I suppose, throwing open the doors, the holy doors, in this year where we're trying to build hope. And really, that's the point of this particular webinar this evening. So we hope that you'll bear with us and that you'll learn a lot from what you hear. But to start us off this evening, what we have done is we have prepared a short reflection. So just to bring us into that space and to think on where we're at and why we're doing what we're doing. So if you'll bear with me, I'm going to share my screen for a small reflection that we have prepared for you this evening. Any of the slides or anything that we have, we will share the recording with everybody who is registered, along with any resources that we have as well, and things that Anne might have said or that Ashley might have said, we will share them also too. Christ in the ruins, finding light in Gaza's darkness. Christ of the broken and the brave. Christ who walks the shattered street where children once played. Enter the ruins with us now. Hold Gaza's little ones close, those who sleep afraid, those who no longer sleep at all, those whose small hands reach for a future they can't yet see. Let your gentleness be a blanket over their trembling, your peace the quieting of every terror they carry. Christ, you who were once a refugee child, who knew flight, hunger, and the dust of unsafe places. Breathe hope into every mother searching for safety, every father aching for strength, every family longing for morning after a night that seems unending. In the smoke, be the clear breath. In the rubble, be the steady ground. In the grief, be the arm that will not let go. May your light, soft, persistent, unquenchable, find its way through every broken doorway, every ruined home, every wounded heart. Guide all peoples, all leaders, all nations towards the courage of peace. Let understanding outlast fear, and let the day come when no child learns the language of war. Christ in the ruins, stay with your people. Christ in the darkness, kindle a dawn no bomb can extinguish. Christ of hope, lead us to better times, times where playgrounds return, where laughter replaces silence, and where every child may grow beneath an open and peaceful sky. Amen. Thank you all indeed for that. And just to say that this has been a long time in the planning. And we have leaned, as Aisling said, on Anne Farr for, in particular, for how we might put this together and who we might invite to speak to us at this event. And we're delighted to share with you that we have three very informed speakers, and they will be sharing with you some of their knowledge and some of their work and some of their hopes for next steps in Gaza. So I would like to begin this evening by welcoming Sue McClellan, who is the lead for the church's work within Embrace in the Middle East. They've partners in the West Bank and in Gaza, and Sue will be speaking about the West Bank and work with partners and the involvement of churches and Christians. So, Sue, in your own time, you have the floor. Thank you indeed.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of you for caring enough to come along tonight and being curious enough to find out more. Embrace the Middle East is an ecumenical charity that has been working in the region since 1874. We work across the breadth of the churches, but in particular in the Holy Land, we work with the Pontifical Mission, the Near East Council of Churches, the Middle East Council of Churches, and Caritas Jerusalem. And I just want to take these next few minutes just to tell you about some of the experiences of our partners currently in the West Bank. I'm sure most of you will be aware that the situation in the West Bank was pretty appalling before October the 7th, but it has got considerably worse since then. We work with an organisation called the Joint Advocacy Initiative. This is a partnership between the East Jerusalem YMCA and the East Jerusalem YWCA. The purpose of the project is to help protect Palestinian farmland in the West Bank. One of the things that it's very important to understand about Palestinian life and culture is that over 100,000 Palestinian families rely on the olive harvest each year to support their livelihoods. For some people, it's supplementary income. For others, it is the only income they have. But for all Palestinians, the impact of the last 5 years or so has been huge. Of course, firstly, West Bank communities were impacted by the pandemic. It killed off the tourist trade, and particularly for the Christian community in the West Bank, tourism is something on which they all depend. And then, of course, since then, the particular challenges that have been faced by communities since October the 7th have made the impact on the olive harvest worse than anybody could have ever imagined. And I'm going to explain why. As many of you, I am sure, will be aware, the West Bank is divided into 3 areas, A, B, and C. 66% of the West Bank is in Area C, and this is land that comes under both Israeli military and civil control, even though the land may actually be owned by Palestinians. This makes this land incredibly vulnerable. And it's on this land that the settlements are built. As you know, since October the 7th, the settlers have become very, very much emboldened. And they have taken it upon themselves to intimidate Palestinian farmers even more than they were doing before October the 7th. This has meant that for many families, they have not been able to reach their land. I was talking to a friend just last month who was crying as he was speaking to me down the phone because all his olives have rotted on his trees this year, because his land sits just below a settlement and the settlers have posted armed guards on his land to prevent him reaching it. This is a pattern that has been repeated all over the West Bank. The JAI, the Joint Advocacy Initiative, worked in the past by taking internationals onto that land to help protect it, believing that settlers and indeed occupation forces would be put off coming onto the land if there were international observers there. But the situation has now grown so severe that it is now too dangerous to take international observers. And so many of the lands are being left and fruit is rotting. Now, this is very, very serious because Israel uses an old Ottoman law that states that if farmers do not tend their land for 3 years, it automatically reverts to become property of the state in this case being Israel. And so if farmers are unable to get to their land, they know that inevitably they will lose it. This is what has happened to another friend of mine who drove past his land just the other day. to discover that there were Israeli flags planted all over his olive grove. The other thing that is really, really impacting people in the West Bank and has got considerably worse since October the 7th is the restriction on movement. Currently, across the West Bank, there are 94 checkpoints that are staffed 24/7. This means that a simple journey from Bethlehem to Ramallah can take a whole day. Additionally, there are 153 partially staffed checkpoints, 45 of which have frequently closed gates. There are 288 road gates, 172 of which are frequently closed. Every West Bank town and village now has its roads gated. These can be shut at a moment's notice, cutting off communities from one another, preventing young people getting to school and university, and actually restricting the movement of goods and services. There are also earth walls and trenches that close roads, 180 earth mounds, and 116 additional roadblocks. This has huge implications for everyday life for the people of the West Bank. I've already mentioned settler violence and how that is increasing. And I think one of the things that we have to be very, very conscious of is how emboldened radical settlers have become. Just after the October the 7th attacks, the Israeli government provided 10,000 assault rifles to be handed out to settlers. There are now another 300 assault rifles that have been distributed to civilian security squads. So these are essentially vigilante groups as they would understand them. And it is now thought that there are at least 150,000 firearms in settler hands. When we think that the settler community now numbers about 750,000 people, a large proportion of those will be children, you're getting to the point now where every adult settler is armed with an automatic weapon. It's utterly terrifying. Another really worrying, a continuing issue, but again has got worse over the last 2 years, is child detention. Military detention of Palestinian children is systemic. It has always been one of the marks of the occupation. But since October the 7th, 2023, over 1,300 children have been arrested. And as of this summer, 440 remain in detention. This issue hit the world headlines this last week with the case of Mohammed Ibrahim, an American child who was arrested while on holiday and has now been languishing in an Israeli prison for the last 9 months. But his story is one of so many that do not make the headlines. During arrest and detention, children are subjected to very inhumane treatment, including verbal abuse, denial of food and medical care, beatings, blindfolding, and being restrained with plastic ties. Last year, a 17-year-old died in custody. His autopsy report showed that he had died from starvation. The cost of violence in the West Bank is huge. Not only have 50,000 people in the north of the West Bank now been made homeless as a result of raids on refugee camps in the Jenin area and the continued process of house demolition, but also 944 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank since the 7th of October. And 35 Israelis have been killed by Palestinians in the West Bank and a further 18 inside Israel. As people of faith who believe that every human being is made in the image of God, We have to stand up against this ability to see those who are not like us as somehow less than human. We need to stand for the rights of every single person who calls the land of the Holy One home. We know that at the moment, this is disproportionately affecting Palestinians as a result of the occupation. But actually administering the occupation carries a huge human cost as well. And we must never forget that and bear that in mind. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak a little bit about the impact of what is happening in the West Bank. The good news is that although the Christian community is hugely impacted, and indeed many Christian families are leaving the West Bank, which is really, really worrying, the church is still a city on a hill, a beacon of hope. The church still runs hospitals, schools, advice centres, legal centres. They need our prayers. And if you would like to find out more about the incredible things that the people of God are doing in the West Bank, do please visit our website. The address is there, and you'll be able to find out more about what our siblings are doing in education, community development, and healthcare.
Thank you indeed, Sue, for that. You might stop the share there. That's absolutely wonderful. I will just say to anybody who is here, if you had a question or a comment or something come up for you whilst you were listening to Sue, or indeed any of the speakers this evening, we would really welcome any question or comment. And after our three speakers, we will try and deal with some of those. But just to say that even for myself, listening in to what Sue had to say, I learned so much. Even when Sue began by discussing the pandemic and saying it's not that long ago that everybody was affected by this, but now the pandemic and then tourism and now everything since October 7th, the vulnerability of the settlements and the settlers being emboldened, and then no international observers, and the fact that if fruit is rotting on a field for over 3 years, that the land may revert back to the to others, checkpoints. And 750,000. I was trying to write things down. It was just, there was so much detail, so many homeless, so many killed. But you finished on a note of hope, that the church on a hill is very much a church in view, a church in charge of hospitals, in charge of schools, offering advice, and that you have encouraged us not just to look at your website, but to offer our prayers for all who are involved, every single person who is impacted in any way by some of what you explained to him. So thank you, Sue, indeed, for being so clear. And I hope you can remain with us. And indeed, I'm sure too, you may have questions, or you may well be able to contribute or to answer one or two queries that may come up. So Sue, once again, on behalf of everybody here, and I can see people putting into the chat, thanking you so much for the clarity of your piece this evening. It was really welcomed. I'm going to hand over, if that's okay now, to Liz Alcock. Liz, if you're there, we didn't get a chance to see you. I think your flight was delayed. And I'm not sure, Liz, if you want to unmute yourself. We have everybody unmuted. If you unmute yourself, I can see you there. And if you want, would you like me to share your slides, Liz?
Yes, please do.
I can do that, yeah.
Thanks.
Liz is a formal ecumenical accompanier, and at present is head of humanitarian protection at MAP. And Liz herself will explain more about what she does and why she does it. And she's going to explain a little bit about what is happening then and now in Gaza in terms of aid and indeed the current stance. So what I will do, Liz, then, and with your permission, is I will share your slides, and you just tell me, Brian, next one, and we'll go with that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, and good evening, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak with you, and to go through some of the horrors that I've borne witness to, and that as MAP we've been dealing with over the last 2 years. I work for Medical Aid for Palestinians. We've been operating for 41 years. The organization began in the camps of Lebanon after the massacres of Sabra and Shatila, and has been operational in Gaza for about 35 years. although I'm here in a in a personal capacity. I have been working with MAP and was invited to go to Gaza about 18 months ago to help scale up the humanitarian response for the organization in response to the escalating needs as a result of what we describe as a genocide. I've got a background in humanitarian work and also development. My first experience in Palestine was about 14 years ago as an ecumenical accompanier, but I have since worked with international NGOs and UN agencies. What I wanted to do is not really reflect on the things that you can Google, the things that are in the news or on social media, because we are not short of information on this situation if we want to find it. What I wanted to do was look at how the situation is now, because obviously we're falling out of the media. And the situation obviously is continuing to be absolutely dire for people. And also bring in some words from my team as MAPA and myself as an individual. I don't really want to speak on behalf of Gazans, so I've tried to bring in some of their thoughts and their words. In terms of the situation, as you know, we have 70,000 people that have been verified to have been killed thus far. We have 70% of those as women and children. We have an unknown number of people under the rubble, and also an unknown number of people in Israeli detention who have not been released or returned to Gaza. So therefore, the number of those affected is likely much higher than the official numbers that I'm quoting here. This is a picture from Shajaiya. It's an area of Gaza City. This was taken in October when my teams were going up to the north of Gaza to visit some sites that we're working in. And I've called this a hope amongst the ruins question mark, because I think it's a question for the Gazans really to decide if they feel hope in their own situation. And you'll see at the end of this that I've tried to bring in some of that. If you could move to the next slide, please. This is Haitham. Haitham is a man with 3 children and quite a sick wife. He is a man with a disability. He works on our nutrition program. And we asked Haitham how he felt about this ceasefire. The ceasefire was announced at the beginning of October. I think it was October the 8th. Of this year, so 2 years and 2 days since the war began, the current war began. Haitham is living in one of our guest houses because his home was destroyed. And these were his words, and I'll just read them out. I'm very exhausted because any agreement for a ceasefire means that there will just be another war coming in a year or two. The fear from this is that we enter a ceasefire, it gets broken, its duration, 10 or 20 days, regardless of its period, ends. And then killing, war machinery, and extermination return in a way stronger than before. And the reason that I'm putting this up is to say that none of this obviously began 2 years ago. People in Gaza have suffered generations of trauma, of displacement, of dispossession, of disenfranchisement. And this has a very cumulative effect on people. They don't expect anything positive to last because history has taught them not to be particularly hopeful. So we talk about the ceasefire at the moment, but there's not much trust in it that it's really going to be a meaningful so-called peace. Next slide, please. So in terms of the so-called ceasefire, I have a quote here from the UN Special Rapporteur for the Rights of Palestinians, Francesca Albanese, who I'm sure you know. As she said in October, that it does seem to be a situation of the feeling is that you cease and I fire on behalf of the Israelis. This was a couple of days ago, but a couple of days ago, we had almost 200 violations of the ceasefire. We have almost 250 people killed, of which 67 children, and I know there are more children that have been killed today because we work on some of that monitoring work. Almost 900 people have sustained injuries since the ceasefire. Over 500 bodies have been retrieved from under the rubble, and almost 350 bodies of detainees have been released. You will have noticed there's a lot of talk about the release of hostages and of Israeli prisoners or detainees or hostages, and the identification of their remains being a cornerstone of the ceasefire. But I think it's important to mention that the vast majority of the detainees that have been released who have died in Israeli detention are not able to be identified because of the nature and the state of their injuries. And therefore, a lot of attention goes into the identification of the Israelis. And for the Palestinians, they have to sit in a room and see a screen and try and identify from the small remains that they are presented with. So it's a really, really horrific situation. And many of my team, my staff, they have lost family members who have been killed, but they've never been able to bury them. They know that they're under the rubble, and they will probably never be able to have that kind of peace of laying their loved ones to rest. Not only that, those who had loved ones who had died prior to October the 7th, the cemeteries have all been razed, and therefore there isn't a place to go back to show reverence and love and respect to the loved ones who perished before this war. So the situation as we have it now is not a really what I would call, or what anybody would call, a ceasefire. It seems to be only a ceasefire on the terms of those the powerful. Next slide, please. What we have is a land under siege. This is the map of Gaza. It's a very simple map, but the area in yellow is considered a no-go zone, and it's about 60% of the land. So this is a situation during the ceasefire, whereby we have the area to the east of what's called the yellow line, which is being completely razed. So there's a systematic destruction of all civilian infrastructure in this area. And this is the area you see on the news when you hear about redevelopment and reconstruction. This is what the Israelis and the Americans plan to build, so-called alternative safe communities, which are prisons, for Palestinians to reside in closed communities with biometric identification and facial recognition in order to move around. We have frequent incursions west of that line, so the military often are incurring into the other area where we are operating, and anybody encroaching or coming close to the yellow line is automatically killed. There's an automatic shooting system by either drones or by land robots that take out people who are approaching, including 2 children who are aged 10 and 11 who were killed yesterday. Obviously, there's no meaningful freedom of movement. Gaza was split in half, north to south, for a very long time. That's no longer the case. You are able to move from the south of Gaza up to Gaza City, or what's left of it. But it's a land under siege. Palestinians cannot move out of Gaza, nor can those who fled in the early days when Rafah, the border in the south, was open, nor can they return. So this disrupts employment, medical services for those who need medical services abroad, family reunification, and education. So it's an extremely restrictive environment. And what's more, of course, there are huge restrictions on humanitarian aid. Even though during the ceasefire the flow of aid has increased, it's still a drop in the ocean compared to what is needed. And obviously the Israeli military control the 2 crossings that are permitted, and they prioritize commercial goods, which are items of low nutritional value, but a very, very high cost because they have agreements with traders. So it's very hard to get a lot of materials in. That includes medical supplies, supplies to treat water so that drinking water is safe and accessible. It includes materials for learning, for example. So it also includes people. So you will notice I am in the UK. I was asked to leave or ordered to leave, in fact, by the Israeli military, as many international organizations have. We're very lucky we have 140 Palestinian staff. However, we aren't able to bring in any international aid workers or healthcare workers such as myself, since we were disinvited by the Israelis about 2 months ago. Next page, please. This is my rehabilitation officer, Baha. Baha is a physiotherapist. He's a young guy with 2 young children. He was living in the east of Gaza, and when his area became under Israeli military control, he was forced to flee to the west, and is living in a guest house. During the ceasefire, he took the opportunity to go back to his home. However, as you can see, his home no longer remains. And actually, I didn't have it here, but he showed a photograph of a tree. And the tree is in front of his home is the only thing that's still standing. And he just sort of said, that they took everything, but they left the tree. And the tree was a sort of a symbol of all that really remained from everything that he possessed. Next slide, please. So how the situation that we're dealing with in terms of the humanitarian response is we're dealing with transgenerational trauma. We have 100%, so every single child in that's about 1.1 million individuals who are in need of mental health and psychosocial support because of the trauma resulting from not only this current situation, but the many, many generations of trauma that has been really inherited in children and others as a result of the many decades of displacement and bombardment. We have over 20,000 children who have new disabilities in the last 2 years, and this is often children with amputations, or children with disabilities such as visual impairment or hearing impairment. The number of children who have lost their hearing is very, very high because of the constant bombardment. And we are struggling to bring in hearing aids for children to be able to rectify that to a certain degree, because they are banned by the Israelis. We've got over 40,000 children who need rehabilitation. So this is, when you have an injury, but if you have treatment, you can prevent permanent disability. So you can, we do physiotherapy, occupational therapy, psychosocial support. So they're able to adapt to their new bodies and find a way to live with the circumstances in which they find themselves. And we still have over 5,000 children that need medical evacuation. There are no fully functioning hospitals in Gaza. Just over half of the health service points in Gaza are operational, and all of those are only partially operating. There have been targeted attacks on healthcare facilities and healthcare staff, and therefore there is a lack of supplies, of equipment, of functioning facilities and space, and crucially personnel to be able to deliver medical services for children and in fact adults with trauma injuries, but also with chronic illnesses, things like cancer, things like motor neurons disease, things where medical intervention would have a significant improvement on life. So we have a situation where it's very, very hard for children to be medically evacuated. But as MAP, we would always prioritize and promote the need for reactivating the healthcare system in Gaza, because evacuation is, of course, not a solution for the vast majority of people. I think very, very sad, and as any of you who have connections with Gaza or Palestine will know, how valued education is and how much investment that parents put in their children's education. So one of the most devastating things is the fact that there are no operating schools in Gaza. The whole education system has been completely destroyed. There are no active universities. There are some education activities happening in what's called temporary learning spaces. But in terms of the education sector as a whole, it's been totally destroyed. So we have, more than 500,000 children who are out of school. And we have almost everybody in need of emergency shelter. Winter has arrived. You've probably seen on your screens flooding and destruction of shelter, of tents. So we have over 1.5 million people who are in need of shelter. And again, tents, tarpaulin, materials to be able to protect yourself and your family from the elements are being systematically denied at the scale that they are needed. And this isn't even beginning to think about reconstruction, which is a very, very long way to the future. So I think I've painted probably quite a grim picture. And unfortunately, this is the reality. Hope is in very short supply, I have to be honest. But it's not for me to say that. So I wanted to, I think on the last slide, I have a short video. I made it. I'm not very good with technology. But this is a voice note over some photos by a girl called Summer. And Summer, she works with us with the Ministry of Health in Gaza, and we asked her what she felt about hope. So I don't know if we can play it, hopefully. And I think her words are say all we need to say on the issue. Thank you, Brian.
When people outside Gaza watch the news or see our reality through their screens, they might think, those people must have lost all faith. They see the destruction, the loss, the endless suffering, and they imagine that despair must be the only thing left. But strangely enough, hope is what makes us alive. It's what makes us wake up every morning and go to work. It's what gives meaning to the smallest actions, lending a hand, offering a smile, or easing someone's pain. It's the quiet belief that maybe somehow things will change, that we can still be part of someone's life in a way that matters, that we can still make a difference. No matter what happens, no matter what we witness, the death, the destruction, the grief, hope never dies. It is the light that shines in our darkest nights, like the moon over Gaza's shattered skyline. Hope doesn't fade here. It grows stronger. It's our way of resisting despair. It's what keeps us human.
And this is Summer. So thank you very much for your time, and back to you, Brian. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Liz. And you are right when you said that, well, we're not short on information, but you were going to give us information that might not be found easily on Google or at all on Google. And what you were giving was a presentation which, from my point of view looking in, I found it very personal. It's your work, it's your friends, it's the people you connect with. It is finding the tree where the house used to be. It was the very last word, even when, hope is resisting despair. Gaza will be rebuilt. There's so much in what you say, even things like children not hearing, the lack of school, the lack of shelter, the impact of winter, the newly disabled and the inability to look after those who are newly disabled, the fact that every single child is in need of mental health supports. And the fact that 70% of those killed are women and children. Thank you so much indeed for a truly very powerful, very personal, and a very full account of your work and of the story that is Gaza very much today. And it certainly adds to what Sue had added earlier on. When we do have a number of questions, and we will come to them in time. But for the moment, Liz, I will just, on behalf of everybody here, I will thank you very much indeed for your preparation and your attendance and your presentation this evening before I hand over to Robert. To say again, too, that if people have a question or a comment, they're welcome to put it into the chat. Equally, too, we will be making the recording and whatever resources that we have, whether it's a prayer or a website or a PowerPoint, we will make that available too. I'm going to introduce you now, but once again, Liz, thank you indeed, and to Sue, who was on before you. I want to introduce you now to Robert Cohen, and Robert is the Chair of Trustees for the human rights charity Amos Trust, which has long-standing partners in Palestine. And earlier this year, he completed his PhD study into young British Jews who were challenging the centrality of Israel and Zionism in their Jewish life. He's now researching his first book, and he will tell us the story of how the 7th of October Hamas attack and Israel's retaliation in Gaza is reshaping the British and Jewish identity. And I know that Robert and Anne have worked closely together beforehand. And I will just begin, Robert, by saying you're very, very welcome this evening. And thank you for making yourself available and for the preparation indeed that you have done in speaking to us this evening. So what I might do is I might just spotlight you so that we can all see exactly. Yeah, thank you indeed. And the floor is yours, Robert. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian, and good evening to everyone. I'm very pleased to be with you tonight, and I'm very grateful to have been asked to be part of tonight's discussion. I want to use my time to give you a picture of how Jews in Britain have responded to the Hamas massacres and atrocities of the 7th of October in southern Israel and the genocidal military response that came from Israel into Gaza. The British Jewish communal responses have certainly had a bearing on decisions made by the UK government since 2023, although I would argue that it's been far less significant than considerations about Downing Street's relationship with the White House, both under Joe Biden and Donald Trump. What I hope to convey to you tonight is a more nuanced picture of Jewish opinions than you might have gleaned from following mainstream news reporting or from official statements from the formal Jewish institutional leaderships. Something I always like to stress whenever I'm talking about Jews is in just about any context, is that our religion is undoubtedly monotheistic, but after that, there's really nothing else that's monolithic about being Jewish. In short, I want to demonstrate the diversity of views that have existed over the last 2 years. I'm going to draw particularly on my experience living in Leeds, where the Jewish population is about 7,000. And for some relevant comparison, the local Muslim population is about 63,000. So on the 7th of October and in the days and weeks that followed, what you saw within the Jewish community across Britain and certainly in Leeds was a profound shock at the Israeli civilian casualties at the Nova Music Festival and at the kibbutzim community villages near the Gaza border. Something I want to stress is how directly connected many Jews are to Israel as a modern country. Well, I know that Muslims in Leeds felt very keenly what was happening to the wider Islamic family in Gaza, and similarly, Christian communities felt very connected to Christian communities in the Holy Land. The Jewish connections were extraordinarily direct and personal. People here have friends and relatives who live in Israel. They will have visited the country on multiple occasions, and they would have been aware of Israel's modern and ancient history in a way that most other British citizens do not. In my own synagogue in Leeds, one of our members had relatives who were killed and other relatives who were taken hostage. And indeed, my own cousin Jeremy and his wife Debbie had lived on Kibbutz Alumim for 40 years, very near the Gaza border. They survived the attack that took place on their kibbutz, but 22 out of 24 Thai and Nepali exchange students who were working as farm workers on the kibbutz were murdered, either shot dead or killed by grenades. And more than 100 of Jeremy and Debbie's neighbors in the two nearest kibbutzim were killed on the same day. So back in Leeds, after the 7th of October, there was then a feeling of great emotional solidarity with Israel. And this came after a year during which the Jewish diaspora around the world had been increasingly concerned about the rightward trajectory of Israeli politics after the return to power of Benjamin Netanyahu and the extreme far-right coalition government which he then formed. During the earlier part of 2023, there'd been a growing diaspora willingness to criticize Israel in public, but that disappeared overnight after the 7th of October. The sense of shock and trauma in Israel was very much echoed within the Jewish community here. And there was a broad consensus that during an Israeli tragedy, the greatest civilian losses that Israel had ever experienced, it was not a time to reflect on the long-term causes or the deep political roots of what happened on the 7th of October. Rather, it was seen as a time to grieve and to reassert a commitment to the idea that the existence of a modern state of Israel was an existential necessity for Jews and was non-negotiable and therefore had to be defended without question. That mainstream Jewish solidarity towards Israel became manifested through vigils for the Israeli dead and for the hostages, and for solidarity and through solidarity marches for Israel or against the anti-Semitism which was on display in both the online and the physical world. Now, despite the fact that it was Israel which had the backing of the world's biggest superpower and its allies, and it was being supplied with the most advanced armaments available, many within the Jewish community perceived that it was Israel and Jews around the world that were under siege from pro-Palestinian support, which I'm sure many people here will find this hard to compute, but that was how many in the Jewish community were feeling. To give you a sense of perhaps the firmest articulation of these sentiments and the total identification of Jewish interests with the state of Israel, the obvious person to quote is actually the British Chief Rabbi. When Chief Rabbi Mervis came to Leeds in late October 2023, he praised the Israeli Defense Forces as being our valiant soldiers and spoke of their bravery and their courage, which he described as being extraordinary. Now, I appreciate that this is likely to be difficult to hear for an audience that we've got tonight who have been plugged into the Palestinian experience and Palestinian news and Palestinian suffering during the last 2 years, as indeed I have been as well during all of this time. And around the time that you had Chief Rabbi Mervis in Leeds praising the IDF, the Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza had released the names and identification numbers of more than 7,000 people it said had been killed in the ongoing Israeli bombardment of the Strip. And those 7,000 included 3,000 who were children. So just to give you a sense of, what we knew had already happened by that early stage in the genocide. It wasn't that people like the chief rabbi or the board of deputies denied that there was suffering taking place in Gaza. They did acknowledge it, although they would question the trustworthiness of the numbers that were being put out by the Gaza Health Ministry. But what they did was that they repeatedly blamed the loss of innocent Palestinian civilians on Hamas for using the community around them as the Israelis described human shields. In Leeds, there was also growing concern about anti-Semitism being manifested through pro-Palestinian solidarity marches, which were taking place in the city of Leeds even more regularly than they were actually happening in central London. And then in November 2023, the Leeds Jewish Representative Council criticised those local politicians in the city who were calling for an unconditional ceasefire in Gaza. And what was notable about this local intervention was the claim that was made in the statement, which said that the Leeds Jewish community is united in its belief that a ceasefire will merely expose more Israelis to risk in the future. Now, I can promise you that it's highly unlikely that Jews in Leeds are totally united about anything. There had certainly been no consultation on this question, and I knew that my own synagogue chairman nor any of the trustees at the synagogue had been in any way consulted about the statement beforehand, let alone approving it. So while the Israel solidarity did largely reflect the way most Jews were feeling and thinking, certainly in the first few weeks and months after the 7th of October, it was obscuring considerable nuance and differences of opinion that existed but were far less visible. There were Jews marching and speaking at the pro-Palestinian rallies in Leeds, including myself, and that echoed the much larger Jewish bloc that you could see in the national London PSC marches. There were Jews who were members of synagogues who were deeply opposed to what Israel was doing to Gaza and who resigned their membership in protest at what was happening or what wasn't being talked about by national or local Jewish leaders. I made that decision myself to leave my synagogue in April of this year, and that came after many months of growing frustration and anger, but it was an incredibly difficult decision to make, a painful decision to make. And then there are many more Jews who were privately critical but did not have the confidence to speak out among other Jews because they knew the kind of hostile, vitriolic reaction that they could face. So the reality was that there were internal divisions within the Jewish community here which were not being reflected at a national Jewish leadership level. And by the middle of 2024, it became clear to more and more Jews in Britain that Prime Minister Netanyahu was willing to sacrifice Israeli soldiers and the chances of rescuing the hostages if it meant keeping his government coalition in power. And there came a point where British Jewish solidarity with the plight of the remaining hostages was obviously in conflict with the way that Israel was conducting the war. And the fact that Jewish leaders were unwilling to criticize the conduct of the war and what the Netanyahu government was doing. A year after the 7th of October, we began to see reliable polling data suggesting deep concern about what was going on. A poll carried out by the Institute for Jewish Policy Research found that 40% of UK Jews felt that Israel's conduct of the war clashed with their sense of Jewish values. And then in April 2025, we saw 36 out of around 200 members of the Board of Deputies of British Jews, that's the community's largest representative body, signing an open letter that was published in the Financial Times, which said that their Jewish values were compelling them to stand up and speak out against what they described as a heartbreaking situation in Gaza. And the same polling data I mentioned just before was also showing how younger, typically more secular or politically left-leaning Jews were generally more likely to be critical of Israel's actions, while older, more religiously conservative individuals tended to be more supportive of Israel. We've also had younger, typically activist groups led by younger Jews, such as Na'amod, which have grown in number over the last 2 years. And they've shown how it is possible to demonstrate Jewish and Palestinian solidarity and empathy at the same time, while also fully acknowledging the power imbalance which exists between Israelis and Palestinians. And it was the reports of starvation and famine in Gaza during the summer of this year that were a breaking point for many Jews around the world who had previously been reluctant to voice public concern. In the last few months, we've also seen prominent Jewish academics willing to accept that a genocide has been taking place. However, within the mainstream Jewish leadership bodies in Britain, this is still a language, the language of genocide, that they're unwilling to accept, regardless of the consensus which now exists among humanitarian and human rights NGOs, and indeed among genocide and Holocaust scholars. The most recent survey of Jewish opinion in Britain that was published a couple of months ago is showing that among 20 to 29-year-olds, around 45% would no longer want to even use the term Zionist to describe their relationship to Israel. So over the last 2 years, we've seen how the views and concerns of mainstream Jewish leaders have carried more weight with the British government, both Labour and Conservative governments, and with the mainstream media than have, say, Muslim community concerns. And this certainly applies to how anti-Semitism and Islamophobia have been talked about and dealt with, both of which have increased massively as a direct result of what's happened in Gaza. The same thing also applies to, I think, how Israeli and Muslim or Christian Palestinian casualties have been reported in the news. Meanwhile, it's not difficult to see that Keir Starmer's comments and positions since October 23 have been influenced by how anti-Semitism became such a toxic issue for Labour during Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. And I think he has been very mindful of not wanting to risk anything like that period in Labour's history returning again. However, I would argue that the biggest factor influencing British foreign policy has been the desire to avoid serious ruptures with President Donald Trump. So, in summary, I would say that the last 2 years have been extraordinarily significant for the long-term future of British Jews and how Israel impacts on domestic politics in Britain. There's never been a time when Palestine and Palestinians have shaped domestic politics in the way that they have since 2023. I also would say that the genocide in Gaza has damaged Jewish-Muslim relationships here in Britain and also Jewish-Christian relationships too. It was just about possible to set to one side differences over Israel when it came to interfaith dialogue and relationship building. But after Gaza, I think that's no longer the case. You can't ignore it anymore. You can't set it aside. You've got to confront it. I noted with interest the condemnation from many Jewish leaders that was directed against the Archbishop of York on his recent use of the terms apartheid and ethnic cleansing and acts of genocide. And sadly, I see institutional Jewish leadership still in a state of denial about the nature and the cause of the suffering in Gaza. In addition, I think the weaponization of anti-Semitism to defend Israel against criticism is also going to harm the ability to recognize and build solidarity on the issue of growing anti-Semitism around the world in the longer term. Looking ahead, I think we are seeing the start of an irreversible Jewish generationally led shift away from a Jewish identity which places Israel and Zionism as a central priority. And over time, I think this is going to result in a reshaping of the landscape of Jewish community and indeed its leadership. But it's going to be slow, it's going to be complicated, it's going to be painful, it's going to be a very messy transition. How exactly it plays out and where it leaves Jewish diaspora relations with the state of Israel is at the moment very hard to predict. But all I would say is that change on this particular issue is absolutely guaranteed. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you indeed, Robert. And I'm so delighted actually that we have that recorded because there's so much in what you say. You packed in so much into all of that. It is very informed, very clear, very articulate. But not only that, deeply personal too, I think, in terms of where you're coming from and the decisions that you've made in your own personal life. Encouraged too by younger Jews, I suppose, and their view and how they're coming to a view and where things are at. And likewise, we can see hope in what you say also, but we can see too, understanding how people who had a sympathy, how that seemed to just vanish on October 7th. And, to some extent, that is understandable. And then how people might have been speaking out against Netanyahu and others. And then when October 7th came, that those voices quietened too. Very, very clearly, you gave us a very impactful outline of where you're at and others like you are at. So we can't thank you enough indeed for all the preparation. And we, in listening, we know that you went to trouble to write all of this down. You prepared very well. So for that, Robert, we are very deeply, deeply grateful. So thanks again. And we're thankful to Sue and to Liz and to Robert. And we have, more than anything, we have a lot of people who have been commenting and thanking people for their presentations and their preparation and their attendance, and thanking them for the impact that what they're learning and what they're hearing is now moving and disturbing in them. We did know too that we had set aside a certain amount of time for questions and answers, and we I suppose we've kind of eaten into that, but that didn't matter so much because it was more important that we heard what you had to say, and we did that. But we do have one question, I suppose, which is probably one that others are thinking of too. So maybe if Liz or Robert or Sue want to jump in, the one that came through was asking, why are governments, given all that is happening and all that is now in view and visible, why are governments not more concerned to move to use their power for resolution? I don't know if anybody wants to try and take up. Sue, I see you've unmuted there. Do you want to have a go?
I'll give it a go. I think the answer to this is really complicated. Because just to kind of give you a little bit of context, I have just finished writing a course for churches called Gracious Dialogue, where I have gone over not only some of the theology around Israel and biblical Israel and the modern state of Israel, but also looking at the history of the last 100 years or so. It is a complicated history that operates on so many different levels in the kind of geopolitical sphere. And I think countries are really, really concerned that we cannot deny the fact that as Robert has already said, actually, that for Jewish people around the world, Israel is a place that they consider a safe space, a place that they can go, given the terrible, terrible history of anti-Semitism, particularly in Europe, actually over almost 2,000 years. So I think that is a consideration. I think there's also practical geopolitical implications as well, given that Israel, modern Israel, is in many ways a modern European style country, which supports and underpins a lot of Western political ambitions and values. It gives the West a seat in the Middle East. And it's worth bearing in mind that actually after the First World War, Britain got the mandate, but America wanted it. And they fought very, very hard to try and get it. They also wanted control in historical Palestine after the Second World War. And of course, it's because, at the time they wanted it because of oil and the fact that, Palestine borders the sea. And so I think it's for all those historic reasons. I think it is an act of geography where it is, and all those kind of political realities over the last 100 years that make it very, very difficult for countries to actually step back from all of that and take a stand on what is actually happening on the ground today.
Thank you indeed, Sue. You did very well for somebody who just said, I'll give it a go. You did more than that, so thank you indeed. I see, Robert, you've unmuted. Is there something you'd like to add to that question, please?
Yeah, but I mean, I can concur with everything that Sue said there. I thought she did a splendid job there of responding to the question. The thing I would add is I think what's happened in terms of the sort of the sweep of European history since the end of the Second World War and the Holocaust is that I think Europe and the West ended up trying to address the whole question of anti-Semitism and why the Holocaust had taken place in Europe by recognizing the state of Israel, giving its full support to the state of Israel, seeing Israel as a Western ally, as Sue was saying. And I think the difficulty is now is that to criticize Israel for what it's doing and the way in which the whole project of Zionism has um, dispossessed the Palestinian people. If you start kind of acknowledging those things, you sort of undo the way in which the West has responded to anti-Semitism since the Second World War. And I think this is why this is the kind of the thing that infuses, I think, Western culture when it comes to thinking about Israel, when it comes to thinking about anti-Semitism, is that Israel is seen to be the way in which Europe has atoned for its own sins. And uh, and in reality, what happened is that Europe didn't really deal with its anti-Semitism, and it's taken its support for Israel as a way of dealing with it, but that wasn't really dealing with it because all that happened is you created another hugely problematic situation for the Palestinian people. So I think that's the only thing I would add to what Sue was saying. It's to do with the story of anti-Semitism in many ways.
Thank you indeed, Robert. And again, thank you for adding to that. I'm not sure if Liz, would you like to come in and that? I see you've unmuted too. Not to be putting people under pressure now, but if I caught you unmuting, you're in it. Thanks indeed.
No, not at all. I guess I just wanted to state the obvious, which is that, power corrupts, and politics and politicians are driven by self-interest. And ultimately, it's a situation where our government have an epic moral and legal failure in its sort of unquestioning support for Israel, which I would argue, I think the illusion that it is somehow a sort of a Western state in the Middle East possibly overstates its adherence to any kind of norms that we might consider acceptable. I don't think it's a democracy. I think it's very clearly not a democracy, and we have had 77 years of dispossession. And I think if we are to look at any kind of reconciliation at any point, we have to look at the root cause. And the root cause started a very, very, very long time ago, and it's something that we are all complicit in. If we're sitting in this country, we are somehow complicit in what is happening, and we have to sort of reconcile that on a personal level, and I believe it as a country. Thanks.
Thank you indeed, Liz, and Robert and Sue, for taking the time to add to what you'd already said in terms of the questions that was there, each building on each other's responses, which is super. What I'm going to do now, though, is I'm going to move on, if that's okay, because I'm conscious of time. And I want to introduce you to Anne Farr. Anne has a lifelong commitment to peace and peace education in particular, and gives a wonderful witness to the phrase making the local global and the global local. As a former teacher in Coventry, Anne has worked in an advisory role with schools, supporting teachers and nurturing peace and justice education where she can. She served in the Birmingham Diocesan Justice and Peace Commission and still leads the Coventry Peace and Justice Group in this work. In 2004, Anne was part of Pax Christi England and Wales delegation to the West Bank and Bethlehem in particular. And in 2010, Anne became an ecumenical accompanier, and we'd heard about those earlier, in Palestine and Israel, and was based in a village near Nablus, which experienced constant harassment from Israeli settlers. And for some years, she has been on the Pax Christi International Working Group in Palestine and Israel, helping to develop advocacy and campaigning programs. Part of this includes promoting and creating resources for the World Week of Prayer for Peace in Palestine. And between 2020 and 2024, Anne was chair of Pax Christi England and Wales. Most recently, Anne gave a talk on gospel, non-violence and resilience of the Palestinian people and the concept of sumud, steadfastness, rooted in hope. Anne is an example of someone with steadfastness rooted in hope, and works to bring peace of Christ to our world and to Palestine and Gaza in particular. And she is a good friend of the National Justice and Peace Network. So, Anne, if you want to share your screen and unmute yourself, you might have to lean in. I think Anne's sound might be a little bit not as good as the rest of us. But if you want to share your screen, or if you want me to do that, you let me know what you'd like. The floor is yours. You might have to unmute, Anne. That's it. You're ready to go. Yeah, you
Yeah,
need to
I am.
lean in. Yeah.
Yeah, I am, but I'm just trying to get it to be a full screen, and
Yeah.
like me, my computer is old. I can't get it to do that. Can somebody tell me how to from
If you go over to home,
that's
I
maybe
think.
it, I
Yeah,
think.
just click there. Yeah, click that from the beginning. Yeah,
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
there you go.
Thank you. And just to say to everybody, I didn't provide that biography that Brian just read out, but thank you very much. And I've got sheets and sheets here in front of me from what everybody has been saying, and I do hope you can hear.
Yeah.
We've just lit the candle, the first candle on our Advent wreath. And we're very much aware that this is a time of waiting. And I am always feeling that the Palestinians have been waiting for so long, and all those who work in solidarity with them. It's that constant waiting. And I just read yesterday from Patriarch Theodosius Hannah, his comment on the beginning of Advent. And he said, I constantly follow through social media the scenes of the preparations for Christmas in Bethlehem, in Jerusalem and in Nazareth, and the rest of our cities. And I see that the Spirit is returning after a time burdened by war and pain in our people. Despite the wounds that have not yet healed, people are rising from the shadows of harsh days to rearrange the light in their streets as if they insist that joy is an authentic part of their identity, and that life, however narrow, has no power to quench the miraculous pulse that dwells in the Palestinian heart. A people who still decorate their cities and celebrate festivals are a people who know exactly what resilience means. Joy is not a luxury or a passing occasion, but a willful act and a stubborn attitude in the face of everything that tried to break our spirits. When the Christmas tree is placed in Bethlehem, when the church bells ring in the sanctuary, when Nazareth shines in its colours, it is not just a celebration, but a clear declaration that this land is still able to produce beauty, and that its children are still able to love, give, and celebrate in spite of everything. And so our feasts remain for us a testimony to the power of the Spirit, and proof that a people who love joy and are practiced in the art of adversity are a people whose light cannot be extinguished, no matter how severe the storms are. I'm conscious that we have heard so much that will disturb us and will need reflecting on. We'll need to learn from it, think about it. And what everybody always wants to know is, what do we do? So we're going to think about that now, and there are so many things that we can do. And what we're going to present now is just a smattering of those. And what we'll do afterwards is to share with you the links and the lists of possibilities of things that you might like to try. And of course, in everything that we do, our learning and our reflection leads us to prayer and to action. And the thing to remember is that we can make a difference. We often hear people saying it's all very complicated. Actually, it's a simple choice between justice and injustice, and doing something or ignoring it. So what we're asked to do, I've just returned just a week ago from a visit to the West Bank. And there we met again our Palestinian partners and friends. And during the launch of the Kairos Palestine document, the second one, and I'll mention that again in a minute, we had a meeting with Patriarch Michel Sabah, a wonderful, much more than 90-year-old patriarch. And when I said to him, "What do you want us to do?" he said, "Pray and keep on praying." But I've often heard Palestinians say, let's not just have prayers that don't focus on anything. So let's think about all that we've heard and then pray for all the things that we know are needed. We pray for a permanent ceasefire and an end to the occupation and the siege, and overall for justice, peace, and security for Palestine and Israel. Other things that we can do in our churches and in our communities and schools and for ourselves is to include images in our nativities that reflect the reality of Christmas in Palestine today. Many of you will have been aware of the fact that in the last 2 years, there weren't any there was no Christmas tree. There were no Christmas trees in Palestine, and there were no celebrations of the jamboree kind. But Christmas was certainly celebrated as the feast of the coming of Jesus. One of the images came from the Lutheran Church in Bethlehem, the image of the infant child in the rubble. And as we've heard tonight, there are many, many under that rubble, and others now living on top of that rubble. Silent vigils are very powerful and can give us time to reflect and to witness to others. And we might have an opportunity to hold a silent vigil in our local community. And of course, we can light a candle for peace, maybe every week, maybe every day during the Christmas season. And of course, the Christmas season goes through from Advent into Christmas and then through Epiphany as well. And the lighting of a candle is a significant act of solidarity and an important symbol. Practical things that we can do. We can sponsor an olive tree, both for ourselves or to give as a gift. And Sue spoke about the disastrous harvest that there has been this year. So the olive oil and the olive trees are vitally important, and we can sponsor them and give them to others and get a certificate from Zaytoun or from other organizations. We can support the farmers and craftspeople and buy Palestinian products as an act of solidarity, to give us gifts and include on a Christmas or a regular stall. And I've just put a selection of some things here. Many of you will know the Zaytoun products, the wonderful ceramics, and of course the olive wood, and not on here, but the beautiful, beautiful embroidery that many of the women produce and that can be bought and given as gifts. We can send a Christmas message to our sisters and brothers in Gaza and the West Bank. And I've just put some pictures here of Holy Family Parish in Gaza, because despite the bombing of their church, the killing of members of their congregation and some in St. Porphyrius's Orthodox Church as well, they have continued their liturgical pattern throughout each day in order to give strength and some sense of that pattern, that cycle of normality to their parishioners. And both the priests and the older children, young people there, and the sisters have tried throughout to have activities, to engage the children, and to care for everybody who is sheltering there and still sheltering in their compounds. And the activity at the bottom there is one that I was reading yesterday, that the educational work of the parishes is starting up properly again now, despite the circumstances in which they are working. And those messages can be sent, you'll get it on the sheet when you get it. We send them by email both to Gaza and to the West Bank, to our partners in Gaza, in the churches, in the Al-Ahli Hospital, and to other communities that I know Sue knows well. And also in the West Bank, where we were just a couple of weeks ago, where the violence is absolutely appalling and where people are feeling that the real stress of just surviving every single day, just to be able to find food or to travel or to anything that they try to do, is marked by difficulties and obstacles and by violence from Israeli settlers and military, as Sue was saying earlier. So a message of solidarity is something that we can all do individually or in our communities, sending them so that we can say to them, we haven't forgotten you. We are with you. We want justice for you. And we also want to wish you all the blessings of Christmas. We can support organizations that work for justice in Palestine and Israel, and there are a lot of them, both here in the United States, in Europe, and of course in Palestine and Israel itself. And I've listed a few of them there. And I'm very conscious that there are quite a few of us who've been ecumenical accompagnants who are on this call, and that's one of the ones I shall have to add into the list along with others. So please just see which of these organizations will be able to provide you with the information and the action that you would like to take on in the future. There are so many of them, and all of them very important. The lovely illustration here is one that I think shows our links between with ourselves and with Palestine and Israel. It's a Palestinian olive tree, and of course the olive trees are important both in Palestine and Israel. And it's a Welsh oak, and the design came from an artist in West Wales, and shows the symbolism of our working for peace together with our friends and partners in Palestine and Israel. And of course, political action is also very important. We can write to our MP asking to work specifically for a permanent ceasefire. We hear the word ceasefire all the time, but in fact, people are being shot and killed in different ways in both Gaza and the West Bank still at the moment. There is a great need for full access of aid to all parts of Gaza, and for our colleagues like Liz to be allowed back into the West Bank to get on with their work of making sure that people have what they need. We want an end to the occupation of Palestine and an end to all arms sales to and from Israel. And that's just, of course, not from the UK, but from other organizations for some of the countries of people who are on this call. And we want full accountability for all of violations of international law. So no matter what the opinion of your MP is, please keep writing to them. Please keep asking them for these specific things that are needed. And at another level of political action, we can contact our local councils, asking them to end all pension fund investments in companies benefiting from the war and the occupation of Palestine. It's really good news that more and more councils are divesting from involvement in the occupation and in the war. And we just need to increase that number. So please write to your council. And it means, as with all political letter writing, it means we have to keep on writing the letters. So those are just a few of the things that we can do. And if anybody needs any more leads into what's possible, and all the organizations have other actions that we can take. Embrace the Middle East, for example, have been focusing on children in prison recently. There's a campaign on their website. There are lots of petitions and lots of profile letters on the organization websites, and we can help direct people if they would like to be in touch with others. And of course, going back to our prayer work, organizations, including Embrace and Pax Christi, have reflections for Advent, which we can use to focus our prayer and our action. Let's just think for a minute about what it is that is staying with us very strongly at the moment from all that we've heard. And maybe just think of one thing, one action for peace, one action for justice that we feel called to make in the next day, days, weeks. There may be more, but let's just think about one at the moment that is calling us greatly now. I mentioned having been in the West Bank, and whilst we were there, meeting partners and friends, I think we came away with the feeling that not only were things much worse than when we'd ever been before, but survival is the bottom line for people. And in all of this, it's really important for us to listen to the people of Palestine, to listen to those in Israel who are working for justice. And one of the things that took place during our time in Bethlehem was the launch of the Kairos Palestine document number 2. Robert and I worked on a response to the first document in 2009, the Kairos Palestine call to us all. And this is a call now to us all once again, which is coming out of a place that is far worse than things were in 2009. And I would recommend that we try to take the time of Advent to read that document and to listen to the call that they are putting out for us all. And also that we listen to the Palestinian faith leaders throughout Palestine, and that we throughout Palestine and Israel, and that we listen to people like Cardinal Pizzaballa, to Archbishop Hassan, and to the others who speak out very strongly for justice. And recently, both Sue and I were at a meeting in Lambeth Palace, just as I had come back from Palestine, where we were presented with a talk from Archbishop Hassan in Jerusalem and from Archbishop Stephen Cottrell, the Archbishop of York. Stephen had recently been in the West Bank. And he was subjected to treatment that archbishops are not usually treated to. He came across armed and masked settlers. He came across the Israeli military, who didn't just let him through on his visit, but they stopped him, prevented him from doing his work and meeting people. And he also met people who had suffered at the hands of everything that's going on, suffered great violence. And his visit has made a huge impact on him. And I would suggest that reading his statement is important, and that statement and those of Kairos Palestine too are shared in whatever ways we can with our local communities and our local churches, and that they are given as much support as we can give them, because it's not easy to speak out for Palestine. And now let's just reflect on the Christ in the rubble icon. And while you remain muted, please join with me as we pray together. God with us, you sit down in our midst. Nothing can separate us from your love, not towering concrete walls or propaganda, or the deep darkness between glaring searchlights, not distance from friends or despair in our hearts, that the world's wrongs cannot be changed. You are with our brothers queuing for aid, our sisters cradling starving children, those digging in the rubble of homes for those they have lost. Healthcare workers and journalists risking their lives, all held in the crosshairs. You sit down in our midst with thousands round the world, confused, angry, helpless, those trying to hold your suffering people in prayer. Born into extreme deprivation, to displaced people living under occupation, you entered and still share our human lives. God with us, we must believe that your great love can never be contained by the walls of separation or cancelled by lies and hatred. You sit down in our midst. Breathe hope into the world. Amen.
Thank you indeed, Anne, for that wonderful reflection at the end. It was a really very lovely way to finish our evening this evening. We're almost at an end, but I'm going to just invite Anne Pacey and actually maybe just once again just to thank people, and then we will sign off by saying that we will send out the recording to everybody along with any of the resources that we have or have come to hand or have been shown tonight. We will definitely send those to over the next few days. So Anne Pacey, if you're there, maybe you might like to say a final word, and then Aisling, I might come to you if that's okay, and then we will let people have a cup of tea. But we will thank you all so much for bearing with us this evening. So Anne, if you're there.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for all the work you've done in preparation for this wonderful evening. And thank you so much to the 116 people who signed in live to be part of this webinar. And also thank you to all those who will join in watching the recordings. It's so important that we share everything that we've shared this evening. So just very quickly, I know Brian gave a resume of what people have said, but just thank you to Sue for reminding us that the children bear so much of the cost of violence, but the sign of hope, the church being a beacon of hope, a church on the hill, that's an image that we must, as people of faith, carry with us. And also, thank you to Liz, and things that really touched me when we saw the phrase, "You cease, I fire." What a vicious, violent image and concept that is. And the ceasefire of the powerful and transgenerational trauma. But in spite of all that, still the existence of hope, which is something that we must cling on to as well. Thank you so much to Robert for sharing his perspective with us. It is really good that we have these conversations, and so important that he stressed seeking truth in what is such a complex situation, both historically and in the present time. So thank you so much for that. Thank you also to Anne for disturbing us and challenging us and making us feel uncomfortable. And we must. The demands for a response must be from all of us. So thank you for sharing the information that you have with us. At the beginning of the evening, Brian mentioned the Jubilee Year of Hope, and hope must continue, even though the Jubilee Year is due to end on the Feast of the Epiphany. And NJPN focused on opening doors to lots of situations and difficulties that we all should share. And at the end of this year, we've discovered that doors opened in faith must not be allowed to close. And they are thresholds through which the light of hope must continue to radiate. And justice and peace and integrity of creation can shine. The light must shine. So in the year ahead, NJPN invites you to share the light and further consider crucial issues that have been raised in our conversations during our Jubilee Year events. And NJPN is a grassroots network which welcomes all who share a vision of a more just and peaceful world and would like to find ideas for action. And we welcome all who share its vision and its mission and its values. So if anybody would really feel called to become a member of NJPN, you would be most welcome. We work ecumenically with people of all faith and goodwill based in England and Wales. So please watch out for our Sharing the Light programme, which will be consisting of a mixture of online events and events in person. So you'd be very welcome to sign up for any of those. So thank you so much to everybody who had any part in organising this very challenging and inspiring evening. So thank you very much indeed. And I'll hand over to Aisling.
Great. Thank you indeed. Aisling, we leave the last word with you. Thank you, Aisling.
No pressure after all the wonderful kind of input that we've had this evening. But I think, yeah, just again to kind of reiterate the thanks to the speakers, to Sue, Liz and Robert, just, I think that witness that you shared enables us to kind of have a more deeper understanding, I think, of what's going on to really work for peace. I think that is really key, that we have those understandings of and those witnesses to kind of enable us to take that peace work forward. And just to thank everybody else for coming along and kind of being open to listening and to sharing what we've heard, because I think that in itself, we don't want this just to be a listening activity. It's about kind of, taking that message out and going forward. So thank you to Anne for kind of sharing those actions that we can take. And Pope Francis always used to talk about artisans of peace and, being those peace builders. So I just encourage you all to kind of take those words of hope, take that deeper understanding out and bring it into the world, kind of thing. So yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for Brian as well for kind of leading us so well this evening. So thank you all.
I had the easy job, Aisling, but thank you very much indeed. And we leave you with the final word. We are over time and we apologise for keeping you over time, but we do think it was well worth the wait. So I'm going to pause the recording, but we leave the channel open if people want to have a little chat before they put the kettle on. But thank you all indeed for your attendance. So I will just pause the recording there now.